part of the mess up of the jet stream has to do with Tibet, actually. And the northern hemisphere, I don't really know. But meteorologists too, there's some articles. The desertification of the Tibetan steppe by the Chinese and the clear cutting of the Tibetan rainforest created this reflection of the sun, high altitude sun, with this column of hot air that goes up to the stratosphere, kind of rising air, and then it creates like a pillar. And the jet stream goes like, it affects El Nino, and it affects the monsoon in China and India. We just had terrible rain. It's all interconnected.
Good morning, everybody. While you're getting settled, for those of you that are doing the continuing educational credits, there's a feedback form that you guys pick up over here. I'll repeat this announcement once we get started. I'll repeat this announcement in a minute.
Me? Yeah, I do. I'm taking maybe Sri Lanka in January. I'm going to town in November, but that's cold. And so I do a couple times a year. I usually take videos. And you can find it in the Tibet Hey, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm good, actually.
What?
Good morning, everybody. I'm still Justin. It's great to see you this morning. For those of you that are doing continuing educational credit, I'm going to wait while people are still talking. Well, it's two people that are triggering the whole group. No, after three, it's rude.
I just was writing a professor.
I can have everyone's attention for just 1 minute before we start.
That's great country. Yeah. What? Look at that.
Good morning. Okay, I'm not going to get them, but since you're all paying attention now, except two people, for those of you that are going to do the continuing educational credit, there's a form back here we'll need you to look at and take. So after the class, come find me and I'll get you the, it's like some sort of feedback form that they need to process it. Were there any questions this morning? Oops, sorry, I turned that off.
I just have a quick question. What does Menla mean?
I'll leave it to the pros.
Mother poem.
Oh, good. Thanks, Dave. Will you tell her what Menla means?
Oh, Menla? Oh, yeah, Menla. This is Menla, the blue Buddha. Menla means the medicine Buddha. It's a Tibetan word for medicine. S-M-A-N, but it's pronounced man in Tibetan, means medicine. And La means Lama, meaning the teacher of medicine. Vaishajaguru in Sanskrit. And so Menla, I was going to call this place Vaishajaguru because I'm very Sanskrit oriented. And luckily someone said, oh, here's the Tibetan word. 2 syllables, Menla. So I'm glad I did. Vaishajaguru is a little something for people. But it's the name of the Buddha when he was teaching medicine. Physical medicine, physical and mental medicine and spiritual medicine. And the Four Noble Truths are like a medical diagnosis and prognosis. And Buddha's thing was always rather than, sociologists of religion had trouble fitting Buddha into the religion founder category. And they finally came up with the idea that there were 2 kinds of prophets, because usually it has to be a prophet, right? God tells them, go tell people, I'll save them if they do this and that. And Buddha wasn't like that at all. God said he didn't know what to do. So Buddha had to figure something out. And so it's said he's more like a doctor or a therapist or a scientist, really, than a religion founder. Although it became like a religion for the people who supported the institutions and the people seeking the knowledge of reality, like the monks and the nuns and so forth. And they couldn't do the education too much, so they just behaved nicely, and they appreciated the people who were doing it, supported them, and they believed what they were doing was good, and so on. So in a way, it shaped for the uneducated into a religion, you could say. But actually, if you look at the three educations, higher educations in Buddhism, there's very little religion about them. Ethics is ethics. Mind is your own health, how to manage your mind, or meditation, samadhi. And wisdom is discovering reality. So that's not really what we define a religion as, holding a belief system and performing this and that ritual action. So, foundationally, I got the Dalai Lama to agree it was maximally 1/6 religion. and 5/6 sort of ethics and science and proper way of living, enjoying life. That's what it is. Are we enjoying life? In the Catskills, we should be. Really, we're so lucky and privileged. And really, we are to be here at this time in the world at this moment. Poor old John McCain died last night.
Oh.
One of the few Republicans who dared to notice that things had gone somewhat awry in their party. And funny guy. So, well, I'm not. Why am I talking?
Medicine.
What are we doing?
I have one story to tell.
What's that?
I have something to say to start.
You have something to say?
To start.
By all means.
Okay. So
Dr. Mark.
Krishnadas being here last night, playing his thing, reminded me. He tells this one story that I've appropriated that I think is all about the sort of fundamental message that I was trying to convey yesterday that I don't know if I managed to convey or not.
Your mic. I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Okay.
Is
Is it on?
the mute
It's
on?
on. No, the mute's not on.
There we go.
But okay.
Justin, where is he?
All right. Anyway, you can hear me, right?
Now,
Can you hear me?
Not too
Not
well.
too well.
Well, it's okay.
Okay. Anyway, I'll never convey the message if we can't.
Henry is okay.
Yeah.
This, you can't hear him very well, Justin. You have to tune it up over there. Please, thank you.
So the place that I was trying to go yesterday was that for many people, when they come into meditation or when they come into therapy, there we go. One of the things, that's a little too high. One of the things that comes up for some people, not for everyone, so if it doesn't come up for you, it's like you don't have to go searching for it, but that there can often be what I think of as like a traumatic residue that doesn't have words on it, but comes up in the form of feelings like anxiety, fear, trepidation, strange anger, like I was talking about in my dreams of, teeth crushing, random aggressive thoughts, feelings of, being dropped forever, those kind of like weird stuff that you're not looking for, but that intrudes. That again you may not have language for in your mind yet at the beginning, but in the Visuddhimagga, the Buddhist psychology, they talk about experiences both of terror and delight, and that the meditative path is a balancing of experiences of terror and delight, and through experiencing it all, not pushing it away, you develop a kind of equanimity, which is a big platform for wisdom and compassion, a kind of equanimity. So Krishnadas, who was here last night, he spent a lot of time when he was in his 20s in India and had a real guru there who filled him with the sense of possibility of unconditional love existing in the universe and existing in his heart. Existing within him, and the singing that he learned, the chanting that he learned, his guru used to position him outside the window of the village temple where he was, so that Krishna Das would sit there and listen to the old guys of the village doing the folk chanting, and he absorbed the generations of melody and of chant that he was, I think, doing for us last night. So that's really several generations worth of tradition, if not stretching back longer, that he's channeling of offering up, sort of the way you do in AA. In the first step of AA, that you're helpless over your own stuff, so you're looking to a higher power, as you imagine, to help guide you through. That's the attitude behind the chanting, I think. So he tells the story of after his guru died, which was a big trauma for everybody in that little world. He was in India, so probably 10 years later, 15 years later, at the home of one of his guru's chief Indian disciples, and whose name was Dada, or his affectionate nickname was Dada, which must just mean father or something. And Krishna Das was there visiting, and Dada was like, reminiscing about the guru and the good old days and so on. And Dada suddenly said to him, do you want to see this special thing that the guru left for me? Like a special, like the remnant of the guru. And Krishna Das was like, yes, of course I want to see. And Dada went into the old wooden chest of drawers, sort of like this, but Indian, not Tibetan, and went into the bottom sliding door of this old Indian chest and took out an object that was wrapped in cloth. I think Krishna Das says it was wrapped in an old shmata. Whatever it was wrapped in. It was wrapped in cloth and newspaper, and he unwrapped it and took it out and held it up to Krishna Das. And it was like, do you see how special this is? And it was like an old beat up aluminum Indian drinking pot, that's like in every kitchen in India, like that holds the water. And it was like nothing special, like just a brand, just like you see this everywhere. And Dad is holding it up to Krishna Das, like with a sort of crazy glint in his eye, like, do you see? And Krishna Das is like, no, Dada, I don't see. And more, like, finally Krishna is like, what? And Dada's like, you don't have to shine. You don't. This is what he left for me. The message he left for me. You don't have to shine. So I see that as the traumatic residue, that some of us bring to our adult life, that maybe in our narrative, our psychoanalytic narrative, that
why do you go traumatic residue?
A traumatic residue because of all my immersion in Winnicott, that the ego, which we're here to talk about, the ego rushes in around the time that the intellect kicks in, age 1, 2, 3. The ego comes in to help manage the environment. Okay, so to help manage distance, separation, the sense of being in a body and in a mind that's separate from the mother, separate from the father, separate from everybody else. So the ego, that's an important tool. The ego helps us to navigate. It helps regulate. It's a mediator. If you don't have the ego, then you go crazy. So you need it. But when hypothetically, and this is again from Winnicott and the psychodynamic narrative, when there's too much fear, too much anxiety, too much distance, when the caretaking environment is not, in Winnicott's language, good, quote unquote, good enough, then a kind of fear comes in, and the ego, the intellect, or the self, however, these are just words, takes over too much. And this idea of the self or the mind as a concrete entity, that's like becomes a ruler, where the defensive organization becomes too encased. That's another way to talk about what I'm trying to talk about. it comes in so that the fear of being left alone too much, not enough holding, not enough presence of
The trauma of separation.
the trauma of separation, developmental trauma, we call, or in Winnicott's language, he calls it a primitive agony. Primitive agony, the agony, like I'm agonizing.
Oh, agony.
Yeah, primitive agony. So I see some aspect of the meditative path combined with psychotherapy as diminishing the fear around that early struggle. And that so that the story of you don't have to shine, like we tend to think, oh, we have to get rid of that. You know, we have to get rid of that underlying insecurity, underlying fear, underlying rage, whatever is underlying in you that you most identify with but are also most afraid of, so that your personality has kind of developed as a defense against dukkha. The word, if you take it apart, Bob has taught me, means hard to face. Dukkha, difficult to face, kha's face. So this thing in ourselves that's hard to face, that the self coalesces around the defenses, you know, what the Buddha is saying is, you can face it. Here's some help. This is what meditation is for. This is what the re-education is for. You don't have to be afraid like you as a child.
Okay.
It's just like your childhood fear, really, that's been ruling you. So we can start to make room to look at that stuff that scared you when you were little, that brought yourself, you know, made you concretize the sense of yourself as an independent, little, omnipotent, wanting to be, but actually scared kind of being in the world. So that's so I want to make room in the spiritual life, in the meditative life, in the psychotherapy world to let that, whatever that in your particular form, whatever form that took, to start to bring it out and look at it and de-objectify it. The psychodynamic language would be de-cathect. You know, we're all cathected to that, meaning attached to those early notions of who we think we are, but we can start to unpack that. So the thing I brought, and I won't go on, but the thing I brought that I wanted to read is this book is called The Mind Object. This is actually an important book for me. It's a compilation, but it has a chapter at the end by Adam Phillips, who's one of my...
Who's the author?
Adam Phillips.
Oh,
you know
yeah.
Adam Phillips? Adam Phillips is a British child psychoanalyst who wrote, his first book was a biography of Winnicott, and it's just called Winnicott. And so if you're interested, if you want to know more about Winnicott ever, that was my introduction to Winnicott. And Adam Phillips went on, he wrote, his best book is called On Kissing, Tickling, and Being Bored. And it's like a sort of psychoanalytic ramble. But it's excellent about, and he's open to the Buddhist way of looking at things. So, but he's a Brit, you know, who's like in his head, but knows better than to just be in his head. So I just want to read you a little bit from this. It's got this psychodynamic language and a lot of Winnicott in it, but it's saying in different words what I'm trying to convey and what I think Bob is so good at, which is the unpacking of the unconscious objectification of self that rules us, you know, again, unconsciously or subconsciously, that with meditation, with the re-education that happens in places like this, we can start to make more fluid, you know, or be less attached to, different ways of saying the same kind of thing. Okay. Where did I want to start? Yeah. If early development has been satisfactory, the mind does not exist as an entity in the individual scheme of things. It is, Winnicott writes, a false entity and a false localization. The notion of a false entity, of course, begs a lot of questions. This is how Adam Phillips writes. The good mind, Winnicott will go on to say, is the part of the self that will develop an understanding of its environmental deficits. That means like the deficits in early upbringing that leaves you struggling and feeling all alone, in the service of a self-reliance that can sustain contact with and need for the mother or the other. So that it allows you to understand yourself as a relational being, not as an isolated entity, the way we tend to in our nighttime anxieties, the way we tend to think of ourselves. So the bad mind, the false entity, the mind object, reactive to the trauma of environmental impingement, that just means difficulty growing up, tries to abolish both the need and the object. Okay, so that's dukkha, like the mind clinging, the ego kicking in, trying to make oneself invulnerable, tries to abolish both the need and the object. The object is a person in psychoanalytic language. With good enough maternal care, in Winnicott's particular sense of these terms, the mind would be, as it were, an ordinary participant in one's psychic life, rather than an excessive preoccupation. A continuation of the mother one can take for granted, rather than a substitute that one is continually rigging up. So that was the idea yesterday of the transitional space, the transitional object. That's the continuation of the mother that still lets you be fluid within the world. So Descartes' finding of himself as a thing that thinks becomes, from Winnicott's point of view, symptomatic, a description of a developmental deficit. The mind, far from being a virtual definition, indeed a location of the essentially human, becomes itself a distortion in the individual's psychosomatic development. You follow that? What is at stake here, despite the special language, the albeit very different scientific discussion of Descartes and Winnicott, is what, at his or her best, we believe a person to be. Descartes' narrator writes of himself as a thing which is real and truly exists only as a thinking thing. Winnicott describes children who have...
I just want to say one thing.
Bob likes Descartes.
I just have to say one thing.
Go ahead.
He says finding the self as that.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, if you read the Descartes, that section,
Mm-hmm.
he fails to find himself, is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't find it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he then rejects that himself is an object.
Mm-hmm.
So then he settles for the fact that he asserts
Mm-hmm.
that as long as he's thinking about it, then that's a virtual self, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Because he can't find it as an object. He says, well, of course I can. It's a subject. So a subject is not findable by a subject. So, and then he says it's self-existent and it's the ultimate reality and it's the only sure thing. And therefore, in a way, without realizing it, he re-objectifies.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
that's from Buddhist point of view, that's the Descartes error.
Yes.
So I just had to inject that.
No, that's
Because
what...
he didn't find it. Actually.
Right.
That was Descartes' great breakthrough, was that he couldn't find it. Then he asserted, well, I'm looking, so that means I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really, and again, he didn't assert that I'm just sort of virtually or conventionally here. He asserted, I'm really here.
Mm-hmm.
Je suis vraiment ici. Non, pas vraiment. Illusoirement. Okay.
So Adam Phillips is going straight to that reification of a thinking thing. Winnicott describes children who have had to exploit their minds for psychic survival and the consequent unrealness of everything to an individual who has developed in such a way. So this is what I relate to with my story about myself yesterday, that sense of unreality that brought me into my first therapy and actually attracted me to meditation. I think I could explain as a sort of premature rushing into my thinking mind as a way of trying to be responsible and be the child that I was asked to be and be in control. But that left me, with a sort of paucity of feeling that it's been a joy to discover in life. In Winnicott's anti-Cartesian meditations, what he calls the mind is an attempted self-cure for a too problematic dependence. Descartes depends on his mind to feel real. He is the I that thinks. Descartes' solution is Winnicott's problem. It is misleading, as Adam Phillips, has said, to assume a continuity of vocabulary here. Words like real, unreal, true, false, thinking, and I are born of histories and contexts and translations. But it may also be revealing to read Winnicott as wondering what might have happened to someone, a contemporary, to make him ask the kinds of questions Descartes asks in his meditations. What could lead you at its most extreme to doubt your own reality, to describe yourself, as Winnicott found some of his patients doing, as not feeling real? And how could one's very existence get bound up with what one knew or remembered? What is one relieved of? What is one managing by certainty? Why does doubting start, and what is its terror? Winnicott refers in an early paper to the child's most sacred attribute, doubts about self.
What doubts?
Doubts. And that's like, I think he's talking about the Zen doubt, like a bigger doubt, like what Bob was saying, Descartes looking for himself and couldn't find himself, that actually being a good thing, but a scary thing for a child who's like trying to, deal with it. And for each person, what kind of thing is a mind assumed to be, and what kind of relationship can we have with it? Indeed, where do we get the idea of a mind as something, an object, with which we can have a relationship, lose it, feel mindless, say never mind, and so on? In Winnicott's view, the mind is that part of the self invented to cover for, to manage, any felt unreliability in the caregiving environment. So we could also say that's ego, that comes in. It is, as it were, a necessary fiction, born of expedience, and therefore potentially tainted by unconscious resentment. Whenever the world is not good enough, one has a mind instead. Here, Winnicott writes, echoing Descartes' opposition of mind and body, and so he's quoting from Winnicott here, in the overgrowth of the mental function, which is a great phrase, the overgrowth of the mental function, reactive to erratic mothering. He tends to focus on the mother. We don't do that so much anymore, but we still do all have mothers, mostly. In the overgrowth of the mental function reactive to erratic mothering, we see that there can develop an opposition between the mind and the psyche-soma, what in California we would call the body, in terms of body work. Since in reaction to this abnormal environmental state, the thinking of the individual begins to take over and organize the caring for the psyche-soma, whereas in health, it is the function of the environment to do this. In health, the mind does not usurp the environment's function, but makes possible an understanding and eventually a making use of its relative failure. So that's again where Winnicott's talking about the relational self that maintains through the transitional object and so on, a relationship to the caregiver, the caregiving environment, the mother, the father, where the mother-father environment is part of you, and that gets transferred into culture, into meditation, into love, into other relationships. When the mind takes over, then you become an isolated entity to yourself, and the relational self is encased by the defenses. And then there's just anxiety when you try to break through it. There's just anxiety. And then that gets you into Wilhelm Reich and the orgasm and relationality and sexual potency, but that's a deviation. In the absence of a relatively reliable environmental provision, the mind becomes a kind of enraged bureaucrat. Winnicott describes the mind as cataloging exactly and completely unmanageable, or rather unimaginable, emotional experiences. So I'm deep into that. That's that's what I'm calling the traumatic residue, the unimaginable emotional experience that we start to be able to experience and put language on and make sense out of. In states of privation, thinking takes over, organizes, usurps. It is not incidental that Winnicott's language hints at political insurrection. He is, after all, describing an internal psychic revolution. In health, one might say, using Winnicott's medical language, The mind listens to and collaborates with the body and its objects, or rather subjects. So I would say that's what we're doing in meditation. We're listening to, collaborating with our own psyche-soma, our body, our emotions, our thoughts, etc. In illness, there's a military coup, and a dictator is installed called a mind object, at once bureaucrat and terrorist. The mind knows that it does not know, and it can use objects to find what it lacks. The mind object cannot bear the kind of knowledge called not knowing. The mind thrives on ignorance. The mind object lives by convictions and information. From the point of view of the mind object, at its most extreme, there can be no unconscious because everything has already been accounted for. Patients who rely on their mind as an object on some level actually know all too well of its unreliability. A baby cannot bring itself up. It goes on. Let me see.
There's
Go ahead.
something really interesting in this.
Yeah,
So then, can I make some?
please. Yes.
So this underlines from the Buddhist point of view.
Yeah.
Why meditation is the last branch.
Yes.
The last two branches, if you put mindfulness or memory
Yeah.
as one of the branches on the meditation education, because this is the danger of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone has objectified their mind in a certain way, then meditation becomes a method of isolating oneself further from the environment and seeking mental states such as formless states, such as nirvikalpa samadhi, such as dualistic nirvana, basically a kind of, high-tech super yogic psychosis,
Yes.
where they think that they're everywhere. It's what I always call, and I nowadays especially like to harp on, what I call the cheap oneness. It's all one. There's no duality in the world, and I don't feel too guilty about me enjoying it with no one else here, because I'm not really here. But boy, it's a big relief, and nobody can bug me. And even I can think, if I have a predisposed idea, I can think that it's forever. So it actually fits with our human secret desire for extinction, and our love of death, and our love of, like people are getting heroin addicted and so forth, like annihilating themselves. And that is the danger of meditation. And I that story you mentioned that I do say, I openly talk about, for my original root guru, he was definitely clairvoyant, because I could go out and hide like 100 yards off in the woods here by a tree trunk, and reading away, and reading about meditating, and I would go and I'd be leaving my body, and the guy would show up like, "What are you doing out here? There's like jackals and wild dogs and things. Why are you out here? Come have some yogurt. Are you nervous? Can't you sleep?" He would show up, or in my own room at the little monastery we were building together there, and he expanding his tract house in New Jersey. He'd show up and knock on the door like, "Why aren't you sleeping?" Seriously. And I was so frustrated because I wasn't trying to escape, really, my sort of anxieties, and he wouldn't allow it. And then at some stage, he kind of just, couldn't control it anymore. But I just failed to enjoy my psychosis. But that's what I call the cheap oneness. So the expensive oneness is where it's all one, and everybody's still here.
Yeah.
And all their pains and problems, they're all still here, but yet it's one. So that's inconceivable, because you're not looking out of your own face only. You're looking out of everybody's face. Ooh, that must be weird. And poor Winnicott, and I want to, when I get my turn, if I do this morning, I want to talk about mother thing, compassion meditation. Because you're mothering me to death here, Mark. So the thing is that mind object thing perfectly underlines precisely why this way of selling Buddhism that has become established in the West is very dangerous, because it actually leads people into a kind of aloofness and a higher level of dissociation if they don't learn something and unlock that library in the meditation center and cut the crap. Seriously.
Seriously.
In the name of Buddhism, that, like letting people go off the deep end. And also, it does relate a little bit to the cult thing, because when they do that kind of meditation, they kind of, you know, I remember one lady who was really good one, and it was a big relief to her, and blah, blah, blah. And then she said at some point, oh, it's so tiresome to think my way through a sentence. So it's like she dulled her. You know, there is one of the obstacles in meditation, one of the 5 obstacles is dullness. And, you know, they have this thing of like dullness. You think it's a state of one-pointed samadhi, but it's the metaphor for it in the meditation literature is it's like a ice sheet over a flowing stream, where the ice seems stock still, but the stream is charging away out there. You know? And yet the person will mistake that for some kind of high awareness, you know, because they're so unused to having a quiet in their mind. Anyway, okay. So we're into expensive oneness around here. Okay, go ahead.
I'm just going to.
It requires learning. It requires wisdom, not just meditation. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But because
Adam Phillips.
Adam Phillips.
I never followed that one up before.
Yeah.
Amazon.
I'll just read you the last little bit that I like.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. In the light of Winnicott's developmental picture, it would make sense that in psychoanalysis, one might aim to reconstruct the cumulative trauma that made the mind object necessary as a solution, but also to enable the patient to have access to that time before the mind. Does psychoanalysis therefore sponsor a more benign mind object? One, for example, that is capable of using insight about the genesis of its mind object? Or does it aim to facilitate its absence, or both? Is psychoanalysis a way of teaching people how to get lost again in thought? Winnicott's concept of the mind raises the constitutive psychoanalytic question of the relationship between regression, even the ordinary regression of free association, and so-called insight. Where, if anywhere, in Winnicottian analysis does the mind come in? To which Winnicott's paper seems to reply, the mind always comes in afterward, to repair, to reflect, to reconstruct, to formulate, to consider, to fetishize, and so on. It is as though the project of the mind is essentially damage limitation. Why is it so difficult to imagine an analysis that consists exclusively of free association? But because the mind always comes in afterward, after the trauma, after the state of absorption or free association, it always runs the risk of being a preemptive presence. The mind object, that is to say, has always unconsciously identified with the traumatic agent, or rather events, that first prompted its existence. Its function then becomes to impinge, to interrupt, to punctuate. The mind that attempted to repair, to compensate for the trauma, becomes the trauma itself. The mind, in other words, becomes the patient's cumulative, in fact, accumulating trauma, a trauma that the analyst might feel some solidarity with.
Might feel what?
Some solidarity with.
Oh.
So that's just like to make you think, you know, like you think you're getting a handle on it, but then you're really still identified with the way you feel damaged. And that plays in a little bit to what Bob was talking about the danger of meditation. You know, you think you've got it, but even still you're clinging to, you know, another way that you're making an entity out of your mind, out of yourself, out of the defensive organization, when to really drop into the mind, like the mind from the Buddhist point of view, the mind that when you're doing right mindfulness and right concentration with as the last part of the Eightfold Path, so informed by education, the mind remains a deep underground river that you can learn to float in, something like that. So there's a sense of being both in it and held by it in its ever deepening mystery, I think. But I'll let Bob explain that more.
Well, no, I don't want to explain that thing about it, but I think we should meditate.
Yeah.
On the boundlessness of life, in a way. In other words, in the beginninglessness was a big thing for me when I first encountered Buddhism. And if you think back, and actually they say that the way that the mind, not problematized quite to the extent there, which is very useful, but the way that the mind tries to understand something is by analyzing its causes. This is a very normal thing for people, like how is it made, what is it made of? That then we feel we understand something. And therefore, all these religions, they always come up with, including the modern scientism religion, they always come up with some sort of pretense of how the world came into being. What is the origin of everything? And there's sort of like a lurking idea that it comes from nothing into something, and that somebody knows what that is. And so then you have, it's like your chicken and egg problem, and you have Genesis, and every culture has this kind of thing. And the high priest supposedly assures everybody that they know where it all comes from. Mm-hmm. But if you meditate about anything, and even yourself, if you go back, in your own memory to your sort of first beginning, you never can find like where things ultimately come from. And actually, all of our experience in life is that everything is a continuity. We fall asleep, yes, and we sort of extinguish our sense of separate awareness in sleep, but we wake up again constantly, and all too soon, because when you're really unconscious, you have no sense of time, so you don't enjoy being. I remember I had a eureka moment once at a local Woodstock dentist, who they're kind of fun here in Woodstock, so they dish out the different anesthetics. Yeah. And once I was having a serious tooth pulling and everything, so they really were knocking me out. And I remember thinking, oh great, I'll be completely extinct here for a while. and then it's so irritating because all you have is a threshold experience. And you're having like a buzz, and you're feeling, and then somebody kicking you out, and it's half an hour or 40 minutes later. And you get out, and okay, here, take the cotton. And there's no sense of having been out. So it's really annoying. And think of the annoyance of someone who enters the formless state of nothing whatsoever, and they're fine on relief, and then bang, it's a million years later. Thoreau actually touches on it beautifully, that story at the end of Walden, where this guy is carving the ultimate walking stick to make as a gift to someone, and then different universes evolve, and then he's still carving the walking stick, and then finally he doesn't know who to give it to. It's like a nice thing he gets, I think, from the Vishnu Purana there in the 19th century, which they had some sort of an English version of.
I actually had, can I interrupt you for 1 minute?
Sure.
In the Buddhist cosmology of the 6 realms of existence, the God realm, where they have lifetimes that go on. And I found that, and that's the same as being unconscious in the meditation, except you're a little bit conscious, but still when it's over, it's over. When 9/11 happened, one of my patients, a year after it happened, a woman came to see me, who I worked with for a couple of years. His husband was the head of one of those firms that was at the top of the World Trade Center, and he died in the plane thing. And that understanding of the God realm really helped her make sense out of his death, because he had everything, and he went to Hermes and bought her presents that she didn't want from Hermes. Like he had anything he ever wanted, and he had a boat, and but he was sort of getting to the, getting tired of what the riches could buy. and he died in an instant. And it was like the God realm, and that just knowing that that exists as a potentiality really helped her, accepting the immediacy of it. So that's all.
That's really some of them that is a meditation actually on the suffering of the gods,
Mm-hmm.
and there's another type of suffering of a different level of the God realm, where they have signs that they're going to fall for some period of time before, and the agony of that, thinking they're going to lose that state. And there's nothing they can do about it. It's one of the sufferings of the God. But the formless ones, that at the super formless realm thing, they don't have any preparation. You're right, they just crash.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the others, they start wilting. They start smelling. It isn't all like Chanel number 5, and then they know they're going, and then that's a big suffering. Okay, so but what I want to say was that, therefore, the beginninglessness thing, I remember when it first kind of hit me, it was because you in a way it's common sense that something always comes from something else. It's actually a law of thermodynamics and physics, material things anyway, that there's always continuity. And but yet you always feel, or you tend to feel in our culture that, well, but what about where did things come from? Where did they come from? It's like, where's the first beginning? You feel like there should be one. And then when you realize that there might not be, there's this like opening and a different sense of time. It changes the sense of time. Anyway, it's very, very important. And based on that, there's a new sense of value where the path begins, actually, in the Mahayana Buddhism. The path of the therapeutic path begins where you appreciate what you are, what kind of being you have become. And you realize that you have a beginningless past, and you have been already everywhere and done everything. As the Buddha did realize before he attained nirvana under the Bodhi tree there, he realized he'd been every kind of being, because in a beginningless universe, with you as a beginningless participant, you have participated in every conceivable way. And then second one Buddha had before nirvana was everyone else also had beginningless thing. So therefore, he had been entangled infinitely with everyone else. These two things are right there in the dualistic Buddhists, Theravada, like supposed early, whatever, the only and early, and blah, blah. And they're right there in that story. And in other words, the Buddha's realization of being infinitely relationally entangled with an environment of other living beings endlessly, and now having come to this point of consciousness within that, some level of consciousness within that swirling that is beginningless and therefore presumably endless, of being able to try to understand it and to try to navigate it more effectively for self and even the others with whom one is entangled. And this is really critical for your own self. If you stop to think about what you think you are based on materialism, you're nothing. You're like 15 cents of cheap chemicals in a bag of water. No, that's what they'll tell you. And it's pointless, and it's an accident, and it'll disappear forever, and it's meaningless. And it's like, look at the stock prices of the depression medicine factories. Look how much antidepressants are sold in this culture, this kind of culture. So that's one thing. So you're valueless, right? So who cares what you do with yourself? Why would you care, right? Then on the theistic side, you're some sort of sinner, and you're like they have a little spark of divine intelligence, but you're like really dreck, and you better like God better like take you up there so you can sing in his choir, his choir. I forget there's no mom at all. Mom is a ghost. The Shekhinah is a ghost, So both are very depressing actually, and both devalue you completely, except insofar as you relate to some unrealistic thing, and either nothing or the big whatever. And so instead of that, if you are entangled with your environment utterly, beginninglessly and endlessly, but you're in a state now where you might be able to understand how that works. It's immensely valuable. And then somehow, however your entanglements were, you got to the point of deciding you wanted such a weird form as a human being, which is not at all, like a crocodile is not really thinking how much they prefer to be like living on like west side of a west side, in a rent control apartment, or playing the piano and reading Adam Phillips. That's really not a normal thing for a crocodile or an insect or something to think about, other life forms, or bacteria for that matter. So it's something amazing, whatever it is, it's called former and future life thing. And then you wouldn't want to go back to being a crocodile and be somebody's handbag, You would definitely not. Being chased around the Nile Delta. And you wouldn't, really. No social security, no anything, and not even bad sex, much less good sex. and my wife doesn't like it when I do that, but just people sometimes think, oh, it'd be great to be an animal. I'd out there chewing my cud, or I'd be purring in my lion's den, or whatever it is. Meanwhile, funky. Funky. Crocodile caress is all you have to think about. Chalk on a blackboard. So there's no softness, there's no nothing. So you're this amazing human being. That's the start. Then second, then the meditation for compassion. So please go into meditative mode. I just want to bring this in, along with this very business about thinking about when you were like falsely accused, which is most every day. But now let's think about this, and that is, given that you've been entangled with every single living thing beginninglessly, which you can't say is not the case given no first beginninglessness, right? You've been every kind of form. Everybody else has been every kind of form. And therefore, every other sentient creature in the universe, as long as you're thinking you're sentient and there are other sentient creatures, has been your mother. Much less, like the good enough, bad mother, good mother, every kind. But they've all been good enough mothers at some time. They all, in some life or another, give an infinity of chances. Even Winnicott himself was your good enough mother as a human being in some previous life. And therefore, and you've already, worked on getting rid of all these false boundaries that cultures give you to sort of shore up your ego, and your ego grasps onto like, oh, I'm the precious human being and I'm like God, or I'm nothing, so I don't have to worry about it. Those are none of them reliable. They don't make sense, actually. They are like unrealistic ideas. Both of them are. So realistically, you've been engaged and involved in the environment. Even your mind is the environment. That's a brilliant thing. That Winnicott, it really is great. It's totally great. And actually, it's even common sense Buddhism. As I said, I think earlier in this weekend, in the Buddhist thing, we are our whole visual field, and audio field, and memory field even. That's actually part of us. That's within our boundary, even as individuals. So we're much bigger than what's inside our skin, actually, already, to start with. And and then when you explode that to the realism, which is that everything is infinite, unbounded, and therefore a little bit anxiety producing, it puts you in a different appreciation of how you can try to organize and understand things, actually, at a deeper level. So then it gives you the quest of knowledge of reality, seeking the knowledge of reality, which gives life, which is the meaning of your life. You can choose to make that meaning. Nobody's necessarily given it to you, but you can choose to make that meaningful. It's just like when you're caught somewhere and you have to wait for something, then you can take that time and make it meaningful by reading Adam Phillips in the bus station. If you have a Kindle and they happen to have made an ebook. So, or carrying it. So now you're thinking, all beings have been my mother. So therefore, although they might also have devoured me, when I was an antelope, they were lions that ate me. They have harmed me, they have tortured me, they have done horrible things to me, also in previous lives. But why dwell on all all of that. The point is, every single one of them, even the most heinous demon, has been my mother. And when they were my mother, they temporarily lived for me. And they were my sheltering, security, my connection to the environment, my meditative healing space, etc. My everything, my all, the loved one I couldn't bear to be parted with, so I wouldn't even sleep. Right? All of them have been, every single being. And then one does this in the refuge field. You're sitting there, right, in the medicine Buddhas in the sky, and all the medicine Buddhas, all the beings who have been nice to you in this life. Some of us have had difficult mothers and so forth, or we don't really remember when it was just the breast and the warmth and the womb and the whole thing. And there's this tension looking at us, goo gaga sort of thing. And then they've been difficult from when we can remember, some of us. So then they say, I don't want to think about my mother. But that's missing the sort of deep level of connectedness that was there at some point. And everyone has been that good enough mother. And then one thinks of oneself, they're all of the enlightened beings egging you on to seek, open up this sort of chamber in your heart. And then around you are all of the beings themselves. And they tell you it's easier if you think of even all the animals, the insects and all kind of noxious creatures, but they're all in their past human life, past and future human, because everybody keeps cycling through, right? The cycle. Samsara just means the total cycle. Cycling, set on cycling button, And so that's called mother recognition meditation, where you recognize the motherliness of every being. And you can, if you have a mother figure in your mental repertoire, you can keep imposing that in your mind, and you can see that face that looks adoringly at you, the mother, that you subliminally experienced and you subliminally remember now. Most likely, you may actually remember if you spent time thinking back as a meditation. But you do feel that, and then you kind of superimpose that on every being you can imagine. And then you go on for some time with this. And it's amazing how powerful it is. Neuroscientists might say there's some mental structures in the brain that recognize the face of a kindly face or something which you mobilize. But anyway, they might say, but you don't have to go into some analysis like that. Just say that you can see it where you see a face, even of a male person or a completely stranger person, and then you sort of see, and who usually look angry or something. We can take a face that we tend to see on TV nowadays looking angry, and then we can see a motherly look coming out of that face, where it's looking at us like, wants to unite with us, loves us, adores us, wants to hold us and cuddle us and so forth. And when you do that, if you then go out the street and you walk up and down like Broadway on your way to Zabar's or something, then everyone is a deja vu to you. Everyone looks familiar. Your familiarity sort of radar is like suddenly attaches itself to every face. It really works. It really will happen. You'll see it if you do that meditation. So then this is the mother recognition meditation. Then when you achieve that to some extent, then it gives you a feeling during the meditation, somewhat unrealistic feeling, that everybody loves you like your mother loved you at the primal moments of your life, of this life, And then you think about your mother of this life. Second step, this sequence of, it's called the sevenfold cause and effect meditational sequence. And you then think about your mother of this life, and if you can't remember being fondled and cuddled and nursed or bottled or whatever, petted, caressed, murmured, sung, sleeping, what do they call it, night sleeping songs,
Lullabies.
Lullabies. If you can't remember that, maybe you have been a parent and you've seen yourself do it, or if you're a male, maybe you heard your wife do like that, or maybe you as a dad have sung a lullaby, or cuddled, whatever. If you try to you fill your mind with that kind of imagery and think and cultivate gratitude toward the mothering by beings toward you, and you then kind of fit that over again, the mother recognition. So you begin to feel grateful to the lovingness in every being which you have found through the mother recognition in your meditation. You can quite quickly do so. You can take the most annoying face that you can possibly see on the news. And if you keep at it, you will be able to see the motherliness, because that being, whoever it is, Assad, some monster, somebody they look lovingly at. They have that ability. The human face can do that. The human mind, the human being, even a serial killer can do that. And you are able to do that. You see that goo goo gaga face, I call it. And then you think about the ones in this life that you've experienced like that. And you intensify your sense of sentimental gratitude. And you feel and they say you'll even feel tears. And you'll have the hairs, small hairs in the back of the neck, nape of the neck will rise up, You'll feel like goosebumps and things of sentimental emotion about thinking about the kindness of the motheringness to you, whether it was the mother of this life, in case you had a difficult one, whether it's some other being. You do this and you fuse this together with the mother recognition, which you definitely can do, definitely cultivate this state of mind. No problem. And then the next step is where you want to, naturally, when you feel really grateful about something, genuinely, because you feel really, you recognize you felt so good and so safe and so secure, all those things that Winnicott talks about, the good enough mother, and appreciate, and then you want to repay that kindness. You want to mother them. You want to be kind and loving toward them. And you cultivate that, and you go and get agitated by that because you really want to do that. And then in wanting to do that, you go to the fourth step, and you take time in each of these steps. And you don't leave behind the first one, the mother recognition. You bring each step along with you. Mother recognition, the gratitude toward the mothers, and then wish to repay that mother kindness. And then the fourth one is you imagine all those mother beings actually being happy. And you sort of will them to be happy. And in willing them to be happy, you begin to see a sort of beauty in them. Like in the eye of the beholder is your mind's eye, as you see the being happy, whoever it is. Then when beings have internal happiness, when they feel at ease, they feel inner graciousness, and they feel inner blissfulness, their beauty radiates outside. And that is what makes people beautiful, actually. It's when they feel very content, and they automatically, and then we subliminally sense that they feel a certain way, what Wilhelm Reich would call the inner streaming we feel. And then we are drawn to them, and then because they look beautiful. And so that fourth one is called the lovely, loving step of the 6 steps that we're doing. And then all this mother recognition and gratitude, and then the wish to repay appreciatively, and then lovely lovingness. And then we get into boundless lovingness, which is just seeing the beauty, potential beauty in them, but sort of even visualizing or imagining them sometimes unrealistically as being truly happy. And then seeing how they have a beauty that comes out of them when they're really happy. We want them to have that. And we see that in our mind's eye. And then that leads us to our wisdom comes in at that point, a realistic wisdom. And we then see them as they kind of really are. Our emotion makes us want to do that because we want them to be that beautiful being that is happy. And then we see how they really are, and we realize they're quite far from happy, mostly. And they're quite unsatisfied and very anxious and very insecure and very fearful, and et cetera, et cetera. And that brings forth our compassion. We find that unbearable, that this mother being, to whom I'm so grateful, and to whom I want to repay that kindness so much, and who therefore could be so beautiful and happy if only my willing them to be so would help make them so. But actually, they're really not happy, and therefore, it's unbearable to me, and I want to take that away from, help them cure that and heal that, alleviate that. That is the compassion step, which is the 5th one. And then when you get there, bringing those other 4 steps with you to the 5th one, you will feel kind of agitated because you will be seeing the real problems that people have, because you kind of have, by having imagined them as blissfully happy, you see that really they could be in a condition where they don't have such a problem, but then they really are in a condition where they do. And this becomes kind of unbearable to you, so you feel a little agitated, all that amazing familiarity sense of the mother recognition, the amazing, gratitude that makes you with one of tears of appreciation, and then want to help them, and then seeing them as potentially so beautiful, and then seeing how they're really not happy. And all this comes together, and you're in a compassion that agitates you. And then on top of that, you bravely charge ahead mentally in this meditation. And you say, well, God or the Buddhas or everybody else is supposed to make these people happy. They're supposed to be happy, and they're not. So whoever is working on it, they're failing with these mothers that I'm looking at. And so I'm going to take up the responsibility of making them happy. And this is the universal responsibility 6th step, which is really kind of really agitating. And because it's it's a crazy thing from a point of view of materialism, where you only have one life to live and there's countless beings. There's nothing you can do really to save them all. But in a universe where you see an endless continuity going into the future also, it's not crazy. In fact, it's logical. And you say, I'm joining the team to make them see that, do everything possible to make them happy. And I am going to take that responsibility. I'll take responsibility for all my mother beings, which is a very common phrase in the Tibetan language and was in India. And then the 7th, the fruitional step, is where you develop the Bodhisattva mind and the Bodhisattva will and the Bodhisattva spirit. And you have this shift, this heart opening thing where you by this time, if you've gone through this gamut of these steps, you have realized that when you are seeing them lovingly and willing their happiness, and they did look beautiful in your imagination, that's when you are at your most happy, actually. And so you then it becomes logical that you should live that way. And you make a vow and you adopt a spirit that, well, I can't really do this. I'm not a Buddha yet, but I'm going to become one. I'm going to become a being that really feels this all the time. It's a being of love like this. And I'm going to work toward that. And some people say there's an educational method to achieve that. And I'm going to really do that in all lives, because since I'm stuck with these beings, this is why it becomes logical. I've been infinitely entangled with them, all my mother beings, and I will remain infinitely entangled with them, because this is relativity, this is where we are, relationality. And therefore, I would like to be the best way to be entangled with all beings is where everybody loves everybody. That's the only sensible way. Everybody hates everybody is like hell. Everybody's just like myself, fighting with everybody else, and everybody's losing. That's hell. And everybody loving everybody, where everybody wants everybody else to be completely content and happy and safe and secure and blissful and so forth. And feeling blissful by just the will toward that is the logical way to be. And then that seems to be defined not only as a bodhisattva but a Buddha. That's what is awakened, is that love. It's not what is awakened is not like you wake up in a psychotic state of separated nirvana where you don't have to bother with anybody. What you awaken to is loving all beings and finding the love core in every mother being, as they will say in Buddhist cultures. Especially the wholesale Buddhist cultures, India, Tibet, Mongolia, especially. Not the ones where it's countercultural, partially, with a military on top of it and a king. So this is what you just meditated. And that becomes logical, because if you're stuck with everybody forever, it's like my Vipassana friends, like Sharon, yes. And they like the analogy, which I do for New Yorkers, because I'm a New Yorker in this life. And And that is, the mad scientist and connected with the CIA takes you in your Broadway 7th Avenue subway car, where you're sitting there with minimal involvement with the people around you, reading on your iPhone. If your iPhone's battery is dead, you're stuck with reading the ads, and you're very grateful if there's a subway poet up there. And because you don't want to make eye contact with anybody, you don't want to know from them, and you wouldn't want to look at them deeply, and they might freak out and think you were weird. And if they look at you deeply, you want to get off at the next station. And so then suddenly the subway car is trapped somewhere and shunted onto a side rail. And James Bond-like things, it becomes a prison. And then you hear Henry Kissinger's voice with a deep Austrian accent. This is a national security experiment. You will not come out from this car for 10 years. And we will be feeding you, don't worry. There's a bathroom over there. And then you will all be here and we're going to observe your behavior to find out how you will react in this situation. Then suddenly you're looking at everybody in the subway car. And after you pound on the door and wave your credit card and say, you know who I am, I have an appointment, etc., and they all don't listen, then you start dealing with the people around you because you're stuck with them. So we're all on an infinite subway car, actually, with all beings, according to logic and common sense, And so then it becomes logical to ameliorate and optimize being entangled with all beings so that everyone is positively entangled and not negatively entangled. Ding. So this is taking the motherly space. Why I wanted us all to do that at this point, the motherly space of meditation that you mentioned, and actually filling it up with mothers. And they do say, like when they make their prayers, Bodhisattva prayers, may I, for the sake of all my mother beings, it's like a really common, even Margen Senjen Tamje, all old mother beings, because it mobilizes the sort of honorable feeling of gratitude and appreciation one has where one takes care of the old mother who mothered one in this life, in normal family life. I mean, of course, there are always abnormal, not so good enough mothers, there are. But it's just so absolutely common in the culture, why people are drawn to the Tibetan culture, because this is filtered out from the sort of people who are really educating, using this education and turning their hearts and minds in this way. It filters out into even their bandit. Your bandit who's just raw shoe will be sitting there going, oh, my mother sentient beings, and then they'll go make offering to the Lama and confess their sins, but and make offering with the money they just took from you. But at least it's there in the culture. It's there in the culture. And therefore the bandit occupation is not really widely admired in that culture, although there still were a few of them. So I wanted to add that because it fills up this motherly space. But of course, the original one is breaking past all of the things that we're culturally indoctrinated about how we're the one, and actually this fake thing about you're the one, big individual is actually fake, because what it really means is that you're helpless and you have to depend on me, the government, or me, the high priest, the Brahmin or the Kshatriya, the high priest or the president, or in our case, and the king and the high priest, the high shaman. Those are the two who domineer the people. And so one of their tricks is to say, well, you're all alone and no one else will help you. So you depend on me and you follow my orders. And our culture is so much, our word for understanding, for realization, to understand, what are we standing under? We're obeying some indoctrination, some diktat from above. We have a very much authoritarian personality. We think of ourselves as the rugged Western individual, but our culture is very authoritarian, as they discovered in Frankfurt. They noticed after the Second World War, after the horrible Nazi thing, that that was Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and suddenly they were a bunch of weirdos killing people mercilessly, by following order, under in a state of stress. So we have to admit that we have this cultural thing, and we have to change. The meditative thing. That's why the first branch of the fourth noble truth, noble fact, the path of the three higher educations. The first branch is correcting critically the worldview, and from closed to open. Which doesn't really mean adopting it. You can't really be fanatic about emptiness or selflessness. No one has really ever charged effectively down a battlefield. For emptiness. Where's the emptiness? It's just as much in the enemy as themselves. It erodes the capacity for fanatic, destructive directionality. It erodes. It doesn't necessarily stop it right away, but it erodes it. And so, deep, becoming more conscious of your unconscious means using critical wisdom and education to go in and discover how you are structured. Your samskara, you mentioned this word.
Yeah.
Your subconscious is filled with samskaras that come from your culture and your, not even biology, but also previous lives, but also from your culture in this life. And you don't have to be pushed and gripped by them. You can go in and find them, and you can find, because you're human, all cultures have something good about them, because humans basically have become the powerful species on the planet by learning to cooperate through talking to each other. Because they were sort of feeble compared to the ape or the tiger. The fake thing about mighty hunters, yes, they were scared. They were hiding in a cave, and once they were in a cave, then someone was cooking some piece of rotten, like carrion that somebody dragged into the cave. And while sitting there waiting to slurp it down, somebody was suggesting to them that, oh yes, dear, when I cook, I take a stick and I sharpen the point and I pick up the meat and I put it over the fire. You might take a bigger stick and go out and get the live one. So if through the cooperativeness and the talk and the language and listening to the wife, they might have become a little bit hunters to make up for their feebleness. But we're soft and feeble creatures, humans. Okay? Look, you break your fingernail and try to cross it. Okay, that's it. We mothered up a storm there. Okay. I see. That's the sweetness of our own culture too. It's a sweetness like that. They were doing this whole thing. The Romans took poor old Rabbi Jesus, and they strung him up, and then they put a big image of that in everybody's face once they decided to stop throwing them to the lions. But still, the people, they put Mary up there, and Mary with the baby, And then that's a big thing in Italy and everywhere, all the Greeks and everywhere is Mary, And they put all these images of Mary where all those Nilotic, Egyptian goddesses and ancient goddesses had been, like Robert Graves, this, the goddess, Robert Graves thing, all over Europe. So that sweetness is all there in the West too, and in the Middle East, somewhere. The Psalms and whatever. David's violation of the Me Too. Me Too scripture. Oh, God, what would poor King David have done with Me Too movement?
Well, we're doing that for ourselves.
What's that?
We're doing that for ourselves in the meditation. I think that's where we always go with this. Like, we're both mother and child, but we create the holding environment of the early caregiver relationship. We're recreating for ourselves. That's the what we do with mindfulness, with bare attention. We're both the material that's arising and also the observing awareness that's holding it all. So that loosens the attachment to being one or the other. So we're creating this field, and then we're experiencing ourselves as part of that field. And then from that, we can do these meditations that are expanding that. Should we take a little break and then have questions, or what do you think?
Good idea.
A little break and then come back.
That's fun. The mind object really got to me. I'm ordering it online.
Yeah,
It's really good.
he put it in another book.
And you know, Descartes, it's so wonderful that Descartes himself found that he couldn't find
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
Winnicott, he had so many books called Winnicott. Kissing, tickling, and being bored.
Yeah.
That's the best one?
That's his best one, but I mean, this chapter.
That's the one you really like.
Yeah. I think he reprinted it in a book called Terrors and Experts.
What?
Terrors and Experts has that.
Terror?
Terrors and Experts. Adam Phillips.
I don't see that one, but I'm going to keep going. Winnicott.
No, it's Adam Phillips.
Yeah, I have Adam Phillips, it's all Winnicott.
Okay.
And then I have the tickling one.
Yeah.
But,
Do you have a question on the schedule?
what?
It's great. It's fine. I want to
We might want to let the teachers take a break. They've been on stage the whole time. You guys have been sitting in the room, so they might need a break too. Bob especially.
Yeah, I'm gonna go for that. Because I want to take a look at that 610, it's good.
depending on the degree of.
Why not? Why spend 30 bucks on an old book? But then I'm gonna look for the other one. I'm gonna look for another sentence. So I won't forget.
You mean you go in and
I'm gonna look for this, the mind object. So I'm
What's your concern about autism?
Friend of mine's grandson. So I love you even more now than I did before.
Oh, that's so nice. Oh, there it is, the mind object. $53.
No,
More buying choices. Yes. Yes, more buying choices.
and this is just hard. I mean, I have
Right.
Use like new for 18, I think. I'll rent right, get it like this. ABC, check that, okay. Come on, give me the one thing. It was going to tell you what you're at.
I know. So is there one that you can download?
Okay, thank you.
So I signed up for your meeting.
Oh,
I
great.
got divorced. I just put my money last week.
Oh, wow. Bravo, you had a good lawyer.
I had a good lawyer and I did non-violently. I used a mindful version.
Oh, good.
And I'm gonna comment on some little gaps.
Good. Remember, we always have to remember that we're going to fall in love with our ex again next life, so don't be too harsh with
I wasn't, no, he feels it. But, oh, okay, well, yeah, good, because I'm already.
Whatever it was that brought you together will happen again. Good.
Other societies.
What's that? No, I'm good, thank you, thank you.
But I'm bringing my daughter to.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yes, madam.
Okay, they're yours now.
Okay, mom. Mom, you're a mom too, don't forget, even though I'm a
Yes.
male.
Right,
And you're a mom.
I know.
Yes, yes, you're not. Oh, you did?
Different in different places. Like Kennedy.
Oh.
So this is in a book by Anthony M.D. He wrote
Wow.
an article.
And there's no JF, and this thing in there?
This is how he
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is like, so you don't.
Where is that painting?
Word. I read that it might well be in one of French collections, maybe they have it. I don't know if you saw the maybe.
I didn't notice that painting. If it was labeled by Georgia, I would have realized it.
Yeah.
Slipped out. Wow, thank you. So can you email this to me? And can you email the cover of the book? You have that? Or any other table of contents and cover of the book?
It's written by Anthony
Anthony
Kusuma.
Sonar?
Yeah. You know, this temple in the heart of
Really?
described
Temple bouddhiste au cœur de Paris. Oh! And his author, what is his name? How do you spell Gusana? B? Can you spell B?
This is an article within the book.
Oh.
And I will send you the all details.
Oh, okay.
I
I love this. Hey, Mark, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can you see this? This is Geshe Wangyal's teacher, who is 13 Dalai Lama's ambassador to the Tsar, giving a lecture to the likes of Regame, Henry Moore, Giacometti, these people, in the 1910s,
Really?
1910s, in Paris, Musée Guimet. Musée Guimet. Just like, look at this.
Really?
It's a painting by Regame.
Really?
Dorje.
He looks a bit like a
That's
Buddha.
amazing. He built the first Buddhist temple in Petersburg,
Really?
1904, 1903.
But it was
In the Western
the
capital.
Tsarist capital at that time, so
Yeah.
it was a
It
big
was a
deal
Buddhist,
to build a Buddhist temple
Yeah.
in Russian capital. So
That's-
imagine how much influence he
Yes.
had, right?
Yeah.
To do that.
Wow.
Amazing.
Wow.
And he's a spiritual grandfather.
Unfortunately, the Russians didn't protect Tibet from the Chinese or the British. Or the British. Well, that maybe was just as well. But, wow. They could have because the 1898. Oh, really? Before the year. You have my email? You put it in there? TBT7? Put it in your anything. It'll come up. TBT7 at Columbia.edu.
I tried to be.
Okay.
And the scan for
Oh, thank you.
I scanned it in
Oh, great. Great. See now. Yes, you can.
Oh, I just think
Yes, you can.
my father will be pleased to
Yes,
hear.
you can. All right, now.
I think we're present.
Yeah.
You're not teaching Sunday anymore.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Well, you know Thomas Yarnow. Y-A-R.
So a small revision to what I said earlier for the continuing educational folks that are attending. What you have to do is go see Amber at the cafe or the front desk when you're checking out. She'll have the form for you. Sorry, I wasn't clear on that. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, cool.
It's very good. Very, very good. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that's probably.
Yes, Thomas Young. Then there's another guy who's another student of mine who does more seminars, which probably the second definitely which are really like, you know, computers, Burning Man, and Buddhism, you know, all kind of funny questions like that. David Kittay. K-I-T-T-A-Y. And he does these seminars. He has the best reviews in student things. He's only an adjunct. Both of them are only adjunct. Because although someone, then hopefully in 1920, someone will be appointed to be a regular professor of my chair. Because I created the chair that should be in the same field. So before you graduate, there'll be somebody else. Maybe May tomorrow from Chicago, I hope. But I can't control what they appoint.
Yeah. So you're retired.
Yeah.
What do you,
No, retired.
No, I can say the record.
I teach here and then I give community lectures on Wednesdays sometimes in Tibet House.
Yeah.
If you become a member or you look them up on the website, you can see when.
Well, I think it's the
Oh, yes, it's so good. Well, you'll see, I pay. Oh,
yeah, and there's celebration.
Great. What's that? Am I what?
Excited about semi-retirement?
No, I hate it. No, because you understand when you retire, you don't feel you have to finish all the things that are all the loose ends.
All the little things you always wanted to do.
Well, no, you have a lot of unfinished things that you're working, so I'll get to them, and you don't mind trailing along, but then suddenly you feel you should finish them.
Like what?
So it's like, oh, like 7 books, 6 books,
Yeah.
etc. I mean, I can't save Tibet. Get the Xi Jinping to change the policy about Tibet and realize that the Dalai Lama is an asset instead of thinking the Dalai Lama instead of burying Dalai Lama as an embarrassment and trying to convince the world it's evil. The stupidest PR advice for things they get it from some old guard communists. But he should change. His father was fond of it. Xi Jinping. He's going to be proper filial like Chinese. It'd be nice to be out working for any that means the way that I did, it'd be nice to the people. Instead of crushed down with their Uyghurs. So,
I'll be very encouraged.
exercise. Ethnic cleansing. So anyway, so that's all. I feel I should finish all that so I can die in peace and relax. They said that actually, psychic told me I'll be happy in 2020. Yeah. Well, yes, I'll feel content that way. Different things that I feel I should contribute to world peace. The world. Then I said, I asked those beings. I said, you mean I'll be dead? And they said, no, we'll be fine. And the world will have changed. So I think we've reached the nadir of America. The nadir. Nadir is the absolute bottom. I mean, I've been saying that since Nixon, before you were born. And it gets worse and worse. But how can it get any worse? Jeff Sessions. And the Nazis and Trump and whatever. How can it get it?
When Pence takes over.
Right?
When Pence takes over.
Yeah,
He'll be better.
yeah, but he's I mean, they've already done so much damage about the Supreme Court. But, maybe there's a bounce back. Like Roberts might become like Douglas.
Yeah.
You know that Douglas, who was a good Supreme Court justice, he was the guy who interned the Japanese in California. He was a real right-winger. But eventually he got up there and, no, I can't think like that. So I think I have a feeling Roberts, not Alito, not that horrible, Alita, the guy.
That's the problem. We got a feedback loop
The
going.
guy who pulled the ladder up behind him after affirmative action.
I won't be able to get their attention until I get all of yours. So I'm
And
big.
they will not change, nor will Gorsuch, nor Kavanaugh, who I don't know how they can stop it. So there'll be 3 or 4 no good ones. If Roberts was shifted, then there wouldn't be hell on earth. He's a little intelligent, but he's a fucking chill. Yeah. He was appointed by Bush. He looks sort of like a cold person. Yeah. Walt's idea, but cold. Yeah. I agree. Kind of dumb. I agree. Like he could play like a hockey game. Yeah. Anyway, what's up? What's happening?
You're happening.
Yeah, you're on.
What?
Okay.
So what do we do?
Questions, maybe?
Okay, cool. Question. Yes. Well, my microphone.
Okay. There were a couple people I promised to go first. Are any of you not get your questions answered?
I chase people away.
So I think you'd agree, both of you, that all this dogma and culture and society and conditioning is kind of the way our illusory sense of the world. So is it fair to say that almost, especially today in this very materialistic city of New York City and very materialistic West United States, the Depression anxiety is almost a healthy response to kind of a sick society, a sick culture. Does that make sense at all? No, yeah,
I know what you're
I'm kind of serious.
I know you're serious.
It's one a healthy response.
Depression and anxiety.
What?
Is depression and anxiety a healthy response to an
No.
emotion?
To a society that's
It
ill,
sucks.
and we're responding kind of naturally.
It sucks. It's a failure to count your blessings. You know, it's like it's immature to be depressed, and it's failing to count your blessings, and then to slough it off on it's chemical. It's the brain, you know. The MSM, what's that thing? The DSM.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm depressed. It's my brain. I'm helpless. All that's
You couldn't
immature.
say, and we have said that
It's
it's
immature.
it's culture, that it's materialism, that
Yeah.
it's the government, that
Worldview.
it's rules.
It's the
thought.
samskaras. It's the structure of what you're told that you believe by being uncritical and not thinking and not using your common sense and not counting your blessings. Look at you. Yeah, I like your glasses. I like your black T-shirt. You know, it's
I
like
think your
it's
classes
great.
too.
I mean, you know, you can lift that mic up and you can croak out some words about. It's realistic to be, of course, to be pissed off
Right.
about some idiots
Right.
destroying the world around us, and then also notice how we are participating in it in some ways. You know, we're driving here and there, or like Wendell Berry, you know, he writes that thing, oh, America, it's okay, as long as you keep driving. and yes, you know, but you know, instead of complaining that the mother isn't good enough, just take responsibility and make a good enough mother out of it all. You know? I don't know.
That
Listen, I'm
requires some
depressed. I'm
revolutionary-
totally depressed. I am so depressed. I can't tell you how depressed I am. It's like, why are we on this beautiful planet, all these beautiful people, and like, you know, beautiful trees and forests? Did you read the overstory about the chestnut trees?
I did.
Oh, God, I didn't read the whole thing. It's like too slow. It's like
It got-
to be
it
a
got
tree.
real-
You
it got
have to be a
really-
tree to read
It
it.
got really bad, but the first chapter.
Oh,
the Chestnut Tree, is
fantastic.
amazing. Yeah.
And you
Richard-
know,
Richard
and
Powers,
so
it's
it's
a
so
book.
depressing.
It's a book called The Overstory.
And it's and Tibet, you know, my responsibility, I kind of feel, and what they're doing to it, and how it's the roof of the world, you know, and the Dalai Lama, you know, the world leader of leaders, and how they're not using his good advice, it's all of them, except Angela Merkel, and even she went overboard, you know, and now they're going to dethrone her if she doesn't read my memo. I wrote her memo what to do about it, but she didn't read it, or the different people who know her wouldn't give it to her because they think was some religion professor, Buddhist studies scholar, depressed character, you know, he's giving Angela Merkel advice. But I saved her cookies if she would follow my memo. And you know, there's 80 million people displaced on the planet right now, running around which is just the beginning after Bangladesh flood. There's going to be hundreds of millions, you know, and you know, which is not far from now. It's not 2050. It's going to be much sooner, and if it goes on like this.
So if our true nature, though, is
So I'm totally depressed, and therefore, the cure for depression is count your blessings, your blessings, and enjoy them, and build on them, and don't take no for an answer about all this misery, you know, around you. And you know, you can, and don't be angry. You know, meditate Donald Trump as your mother. Donald died. And then after a sex change operation and letting his hair down, and like a little hormone, and maybe the top hair will grow back. And then they're nursing you, like, you're really, really great. You're really, really great. Wow, you're so great. And just cheer up, you know. And then be kind to him and kick him out of the White House.
Yeah.
Send him back to Mar-a-Lago as a cook. You know, to work with the immigrants in the kitchen. And then he'll cheer up. out there dishing a corned beef hash. All he'll know how to do is open a can.
So that was really the premise. The real question was, if our true natures are Buddha nature, so to speak.
Your true nature is?
If our true nature is our Buddha nature.
Yeah, that's right.
So what have we become? Why are we like this? Where did the illusion come from and why?
Oh, that's the big question. The classic answer to that question is to thicken the plot. Thicken the plot.
Yes.
Thanks.
Right?
Yeah, why is there not? Why aren't we all Buddha?
Why are we?
Right, but where did the illusion
But the
come
point
from?
is,
What does it
where
serve?
it comes from is solved by beginninglessness. So it isn't to worry about where it comes from. What it is how to get rid of it.
But it doesn't serve us.
And no. How to get rid of anything covering it over. And the encouraging, wonderful thing is that it's there in you. And so you can go in and find that. And even if you have the wrong idea at first, that when you get in there, you'll be separate from all responsibilities and be sort of free in some place of abstract, absolute freedom, psychotic freedom. Even though you might do that, but when you discover it, apparently the strange things happen, but you discover that everybody else is there with you. And being disappears. Even the state of disappearance disappears. And then you're there with everybody. That's what happens to all those Hinayana arhats. They're like, oh, Buddha. Shariputra in the Lotus Sutra, he says, oh, Buddha, when I heard you saying that there's no separate nirvana, and every life itself is all just the golden body of all Buddhas, and all beings and everything, I thought you were the devil, and I ran away into the woods. And I thought you were the devil impersonating the Buddha. And actually, maybe not. But then how come you told us this thing about suffering? Why didn't you tell us right away? It's all bliss. And Buddha said, well, it's like the doctor who has a bunch of children, and he's away on a medicine trip, and they break into his medicine cabinet, and they take all kind of too many different medicines, and they get all stoned, and they get really sick. And then he comes back and they become completely paranoid. And he has remedies, but they won't take anything he gives them. So what he does is he takes the remedies and he locks them back up in the medicine cabinet and he goes away on a trip again. And they break it. And then they take the remedies. So it's like that. That's why I didn't tell you, because you were bent on escaping. So I gave you like escape. And then where you escaped, you thought you were escaping. You opened the door, you jumped out there into space. And suddenly everybody was in space there. Your old mother-in-law was in space, your arch enemy. They were all there with you, and they were like, hey, what about me? So that's in Buddha Sutra.
I guess I'm looking for some sense of
Don't hog it up. Don't hog it up. So there's another question. Who's the other question?
Over the side.
Hi.
Yes.
Okay. I found it very interesting, your story of your teacher knowing where you were no matter where you hit.
He was
the
amazing.
clairvoyance. Yes.
He
So
was.
my question is, do you have any tips on how we can tap into the ability of clairvoyance?
Of
Whether it's
course, certainly. You can, if you meditate a lot, you naturally get clairvoyance. And actually, when you die, if you read the book of the dead, they warn you. They say that your mind, your continuum of your mind, object mind, subject mind, it becomes, the minute it's free of the clogged up wetware in the brain, it's 9 times more intelligent instantly. And then it warns you and it says, listen, when you're back at your funeral, when you're still kind of trying to figure out how come not my body and like oh no, mom or my beloved or my kids or somebody, my uncle, and you're kind of around, for a while with that. And then it says you're clairvoyant and you read everybody's mind. And Uncle Joe is like, oh, poor Bob, I'm missing him so much. And you're reading his mind and saying, good riddance. That Bob is not going to tell me I'm an ass to be a Republican anymore. And thank God he's gone. And then don't be pissed off. Everybody has ambivalence in their mind. Just because you read all of it then. And then the priest is going, oh, poor Professor Thurman, he died. And then the priest is like, oh, if I can get rid of this crap, just burn the bugging body, and let me go back and have a beer and a wine, or go chase one of my choir boys. And you're reading that mind, and you realize it's a fake, it's a crappy ceremony because you're clairvoyant. So they warn you that your natural mind, free of the brain, actually, between brains, is more smart than your regular one. So it naturally happens, but then they say don't get into it, because being clairvoyant when you're still developing your own thing doesn't help. All you do is you get to read other people's ignorance in addition to your own. So don't start getting all thrilled by special extra sensory things, but stay focused on trying to discover your own reality when you were literally looking for the Buddha nature in yourself and everyone, and bringing it to life, the fact. And what is the Buddha nature? It's not just a little seed somewhere. It is all the Buddha's minds are already in you. Because remember, being a Buddha defined, you feel you are everybody else simultaneously. Like a mother feels she is her child at the very, very first, when she's not that separate right away, right? At first, right? Too much, There's a bit of a struggle to say separate, but she's not that separate after all that work. And so Buddha feels like that about everybody. So Buddha nature is infinite numbers of Buddhas in our mind. And so find those and find oneness with those. And then that'll open oneness with everybody. So don't worry about it.
It's
natural, and also we often know, like blind dates, all these kind of problems, with dating and people doing mean things and people behaving badly. If you ever had a bad experience with someone, when you think back on it, you say, oh, the way that guy was right away when they first met him, I knew it. Such an idiot. Of course, I was being polite and, oh yes, let's go over here and whatever. And then eventually I realized I was such an idiot and I had to go home. I had to walk, I couldn't take the ride. It was too dangerous. And so we have intuitions about things, even ordinarily, that we don't pay attention to, because we're going in on an inner narrative of like what we should be doing, etc., instead of listening to our hunches. So this is my recommendation to women, especially who are trying to find their new power now, which is, be rude before you're pissed off, and say no and say goodbye and whatever when you're still in a good humor, before the person has finished the idiotic paragraph, page, and chapter. When you hear the first two sentences and your intuition tells you this one is really dumb.
Yeah, that's the functional aspect of it that I'm looking for, that I think as women and as a mom, and sort of, I wouldn't mind a Winnicott angle of it, that, you feel you have some of that with your children, you just kind of know
Intuition.
Intuition. And so where is intuition versus clairvoyance, that mother ability?
Yeah.
What,
Everybody's clairvoyant.
just tapping into
Everybody knows everything about everybody else automatically. Just look at their face. You know. But we don't pay attention to what we know.
I think that what I would say is what Bob's saying in terms of paying attention to what you already know. What happens in meditation is that you're clarifying your mind. So your deeper intuition becomes obvious to you.
When you hone in on that,
the peripheral stuff, the repetitive thoughts that get in the way, that's really about your anxiety and trying to manage the superficial stuff. That gets boring after a while in meditation, and you see it and you see it and you see it, and it stops being interesting, and then you just see it as thought instead of getting caught by the content. And so that sort of lifts after a while, not forever, but if you're and your deeper truths, like your intuitions about who's a good person, who's someone to be wary of, what you want to do next in your life, what's important to you, those deeper intuitive feeling thoughts become something that you take, you can't help but honor.
And not only your own intuition, you can borrow other people's intuition. For example, you can read Advice Not Given, How to Get Over Yourself. And if you read it a lot, and then you're feeling depressed. And I was thinking of was my friend, the reincarnation of Meister Eckhart, the great Christian mystic, namely Eckhart Tolle.
He was going to kill himself. He was so depressed. He was about to go down the drain. He was definitely going to kill himself. And what happened was there was a voice, his inner monologue, the one he believed that came out of absolute ego, was you're worthless and life is worthless. You might as well do yourself in and going on with it. And then another voice, which he doesn't really identify in his narration of the story, suddenly, which he also could feel was in a way equally valid or even more, and it was still him or enough for him to use, was saying, why am I listening to you? Be quiet. You know, you don't really have the final answer. I don't have to do what you say. He found another voice in his mind that said, like, forget about it. Do something else. So I'm saying you read a lot of advice not given, and you're kind of depressed, and you're not finding your intuition, and you're with some inner monologue, I'm going to go over here and do this and that and the other, and then you just hear something about, you know, because mindfulness is so precious and valuable because you become aware of all the other different multiplicity of voices and distractions in your mind, and then you suddenly hear Dr. Mark saying, why are you taking yourself so seriously? What's the matter with you? Why don't you go eat a bagel or something like that? Great. And something like that. And then they're borrowing another person's intuition. You know? And Buddha's intuition, that's why the Buddhist literature, it's all beyond speech, but they talk all the time. There's the one Zen master in the commentary on the Blue Cliff Record, the Thomas Cleary's masterpiece translation. Don't listen to those Zen people who say, that's the best. And there's one commentary that says, from the moment he attained enlightenment of the tree to his moment of his death, the Buddha never spoke a single word. And then the Zen master in his commentary says, such a garrulous, non-speaking, filled the Dragon King's cave with scripture. So cool. I love Zen. The real ones are really something special. They really are. Okay.
I told a story in Advice Not Given that about how I was at a dinner party on the Upper East Side a couple of years ago, and it was like an art world dinner party. I was there with my wife, and I was talking in the corner with this guy about my age, mid-60s, retired lawyer who I thought had no interest in anything spiritual, but he was a nice guy. But we started talking, and I told him what I did, and he said, "Oh, I just came from a mindfulness retreat, Johnny Kabat-Zinn mindfulness retreat. First one I ever did at a hotel on Route 128 in Boston, like a sort of generic hotel. And I have to tell you this one thing that happened." He said, I'm a Jewish guy. I had one of those mothers who knew me better than I knew myself, who was always like in my head telling me what was wrong with me and what I had to do to fix myself, and could never get away from her, and horrible. And I was at this meditation retreat, and I came down the stairs in the morning for breakfast after 2 or 3 days of basically silent mindfulness retreat, and I heard a voice, and it wasn't my voice. And I'm not crazy. I never hear voices. I made a lot of money as a real estate lawyer. I heard a voice, and the voice said, "It's time to forgive your mother." And he did, more or less. Very good. Yeah, and I used that with I think in my mind, I don't know if I put it in the book, but I paired it with this thing from Adam Phillips, where he talks about the violent nostalgia that people have about wanting to go back into their early childhood and heal the thing with their parents, heal the trauma, and how how nostalgia is the most intense kind of violence or something. Like we could just learn to leave it alone. Like you take what I think. Also, I heard Bruce Springsteen on the radio before he did his Broadway show, talking about his alcoholic father, who was horrible to him, but how he figured out that you had to take what was good from your parents and leave the rest. Like you don't forgive. It doesn't have to be forgiveness the way we think about Christian forgiveness. It could just be like, okay, the forgiveness, time to forgive the mother. Like doesn't have to make it all better, but he doesn't have to be preoccupied with it anymore. And that goes with the counting your blessings.
Do you know the joke about the 3 reasons how you know that Jesus was Jewish?
No.
Does everybody know that joke?
No.
You don't?
Yeah.
No. He worked in his father's business. He stayed at home till he was 30. And his mother thought he was God. Okay, what's the next one? Yes, Grace.
Yeah, is this on? No.
Amazing. Grace.
I've cried so much I can't see through my contacts anymore.
Amazing Grace.
Sweetness, yours. Thank you, darling. Okay. Well, okay. So Thomas Cleary Good, Twilight Goddesses book.
What's that?
His book, Twilight Goddesses,
Thomas Cleary?
is a pretty freaking
Yeah,
amazing.
Blue Cliff Record?
Uh,
Are you asking about his
Well,
book?
no, I'm just saying, because I heard you say something about him just now, and I found him a while ago, because been trying to
Oh,
figure
he's
out
fantastic.
this Korean
He's a little
neuroscientist.
wacky nowadays, but boy,
Okay.
was he the greatest
He's
translator
great.
from Chinese
Okay,
and
cool.
Japanese.
So next, Mark. So I want to tell all of you. So I've been down the books that Mark has read into Audible, where it's his voice reading his own work, are so delicious to hear. And you can repeat things and hear them again, and then they hit another part and go, wow, and wait, what did he say? So, so I just want to recommend those.
They
And
make you cry.
darling, they make me cry
They make
and
you cry.
laugh and go, fuck, and stuff like that. Anyway, so please
I have a
keep.
good story about doing those.
Do, well, tell it right now, and then I want to say
That
back.
plays into my little thing I revealed about the stammering,
Yeah.
which was when I was reading Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart. When you do it, they put you in like a telephone booth, like an little tiny audio booth, and there's an engineer sitting outside, and you're all alone in the booth with the microphone. And I had to read, the book, Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart, and the first word of the text, I forget what the word is now, but I couldn't get it, like played into my old stuttering thing. And usually the trick I learned from my speech therapist when I was 10 years old was if I'm stuck on a word, to substitute another word that so bring in, instead of saying Mark, and when I have to say my name, if I say my name is Mark, when we're going around the room, I could say my name is Mark, fine, but I couldn't say Mark, So, so that trick helped me, and I stopped stuttering. But here, where I had to read, I couldn't change the text of my own book, so I was like hoist by my own petard, and so I'm struggling in the booth, and it's in this and I'm like heating up in the booth, sweating. And finally, I hear the voice of the engineer in my ear. You've got like a Dr. Epstein. Is everything okay in there?
In the phone book?
In the phone booth, everything, because it was side, they're waiting, and I couldn't talk.
I have a phone book story.
You
I
do?
can free associate.
Yes.
Do you know who Peter Berger was? Did you ever read any of his books?
No.
He was the greatest sociologist of religion recently. I know sometimes he calls himself sociologist of knowledge. And he was a Vietnamese Jew who became a Lutheran, and very strict Protestant Lutheran anyway. And then he became very interested in Eastern religion. We became great friends, and we had like dialogues for some years. And he would come to Amherst when he moved to BU, and we would have these dialogues. I would go to BU and have these dialogues, and he relished putting me under the. Never mind, that's a side story. So then he called me. One day I'm in the teaching in a summer school in Amherst. When we had our Institute of Buddhist Studies summer school, sort of like here, but there.
Yeah.
And I'm called out of a class, and an emergency call from Peter Berger. And this is really a very famous, in religious studies circle, author, the Sacred Pavilion and all kind of books. And he's called, he says, wow. He says, you know that lady, I forget her name, but she was, he met her at one of our summer events. She's a yoga teacher, and also used to teach the White Tara thing, and she sort of looked like White Tara. She was really a lovely person. He is probably. I haven't seen her in a decade. But when I'm in McDougal Street, he said, I'm in a phone booth. And I said, okay, great. What's the matter? He said, well, I was at her, Catherine's or whatever, and teaching on the White Tara, and I was meditating with her, but I had to come and call you. I said, well, why? He said, well, my boundaries are slipping. I said, well, it's all right, Peter. you're in a phone booth, you know, it's made of metal and glass. You can't slip too far. But, you know, if you really want to guts it out, you might still find you have bigger boundaries and go back up there and it'll be okay. You know, there's like a bunch of people, it's like a you know, those were not the days of big, huge yoga centers everywhere, but it's like, or whatever she was teaching in some loft, you know. And I couldn't believe it. My boundaries are slipping. I was encountering the Dharma, you know, boundaries were slipping. Can you imagine a BU tenured senior chairman of the Department of Sociology? Boundaries are slipping easily. It's like you in a phone booth. Who called you?
Oh, sorry, baby. I'm sorry.
Who called you in there? The voice?
I was in the booth reading the book, but I couldn't read the book, and the engineer finally came in, like worried about me. Then I had another trick about how to make myself talk.
Oh, really? What?
Yeah, it's like to make a little movement that freed me from anything.
My subconscious has voices sometimes that talk to me. It always sounds like Walter Cronkite. It doesn't sound like George Burns, you know.
Dates you.
Not George Burns, you know, right? God, George Burns, yeah. But Walter, always Walter Cronkite. That's the way it is. When I first saw in 1964, the powder mandala, you know, the color particle mandala of the Kala Chakra in Dharamsala in the April month when they always make it and do an initiation at the monastery, which I was a member of at the time. And when I first saw that, all those colored particles arranged in this incredible way, just like powder, you know, you could see footprint of a fly in it. It was so delicate, you know, and they would wear bandanas not to breathe when they were making it, with these cake ornamenting kind of things. And when I saw it, the Walker Cronkite voice went off, and it said, if human beings can make anything that beautiful, enlightenment definitely is possible. It did say. And that was Walter. He didn't add CBS. That's the way it is. He didn't add that. He just said that. I was very pleased to hear it.
So really two just technical questions. One for you, Bob, is what is the English name of the blue of the medicine Buddha?
Of the what?
Of the medicine Buddha's blue. Is there an English?
Medicine Buddha's guru?
The color of blue that is the medicine
sapphire blue.
Sapphire blue. Okay, thank you.
Well, that's right. Some people say lapis lazuli blue.
Yeah.
But that's silly because lapis lazuli is opaque.
Yeah.
It's not transparent. So the deep blue of the sapphire, which is similar to, you know, there's various varieties of colors of sapphire, but we associate it with the deep blue. So Vaidurya is the Sanskrit word. Vaidurya Prabharaj is called king of the sapphire radiance. Is the medicine Buddha. And that blue light, it's the same light as Dr. Who has on his police box, on his TARDIS that goes when he travels through time.
What are you talking about?
Remember Dr. Who? Mark.
Yeah.
You've got to go on Netflix or wherever it is, and you know, Fandango or someplace and find Doctor Who and binge out of it.
Okay.
Give yourself a break.
I give myself a lot of
You really got to watch Doctor Who.
Doctor Who.
It's so good nowadays. I mean, really, it's a sci-fi. He's a time lord. He's like a Vimalakirti, actually.
Yeah.
And he travels in time. He has 2 hearts. And there's 9 embodiments. And now they've added a 10th, which is a female, which is going to be really nice. And he travels the cosmos and he sort of interacts at different histories and different things on different planets. And in the early years, it's the longest running, longer than Star Trek. And in the early years, it was very low budget. So the Daleks, who were these evil beings who were humanoid brains that had transferred themselves into robots, and they were really frustrated and they resented humans who had soft skin and things, so they were going around killing them. But they looked like a small Hoover vacuum cleaner. And they'd go around like, exterminate, exterminate. And he would always have to deal with them. But now they're very high-tech, amazing looking machines.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great special effects.
Do I have to watch it from the beginning?
No.
No, you can binge out at any level. They're different. There's 9 different doctors.
9 doctors.
Yeah, 9, and then there's I guess the lady is the 10th one, which that's a new season. I haven't seen it, but they're really you only watch it after the thing, so you can watch without commercials.
Right.
BBC has too much commercial. But there, it's really amazing.
Do I just press?
And I think
So
the
I have a
female Doctor
question.
Who is not there to help
you
poor
ask
Theresa
them.
May now.
Okay.
She really needs, it's very popular in England, of course. So it's British.
Okay, so sorry, I'm gonna be quick now.
Okay.
So Mark, please continue, as you continue writing, please record your books, because I really,
I recorded the latest.
I know you did, darling, and I
You
have
did?
them all that you did, and I
You
haven't
yourself
yet.
read it?
I myself. read
Yeah,
it.
That's
and
great.
I haven't yet listened to the ones where you're not the narrator,
Yeah,
because
me either.
hearing you, yeah, okay.
I have to listen to the ones where I am the narrator.
Well, they're lovely,
Thank you.
they're lovely, and the,
Did you have a question?
What's Wrong, Little Pookie, I have handed on, so
Oh, I-
reading back to us in New York
I brought
City.
that.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's nourished my students. One has
Uh-huh.
taken it to read her 2.5-year-old son on their vacation. So anyway, so my real question though, because of my own struggle with love, the erotic, psychic stuff now I see, and a lot of things that are, the more I practice, the more rich. And I think with psychic phenomena or clairvoyance, it seemed, what struck me was just to touch it in the same way I touch my sweat with my awareness or whatever, just let it all carry on and don't get too upset. So, but my question is, if you know Jessica Benjamin, I've been trying to figure out my psychotherapeutic experiences with a very compelling, unusual Korean neuroscientist who said cruel in the one story I told about my husband, and I thought, oh shit, that means there's been cruelty forever, but I can remember. So, is this book Beyond Doer and Done To? I'm thinking about who are the psychoanalytic, progressive, neuroscience, da-da-da people. So this looked like an incredible book, Recognition Theory, Intersubjectivity, and the Third. Is this a sort of mapping trail in that realm of what we're, okay, I really just wanted to know.
What's that book?
Jessica Benjamin.
She's referring to a book by a feminist psychoanalyst named Jessica Benjamin, who is a friend of mine.
Good.
Do you know? You don't know her. She wrote a book called Bonds of Love, which is an amazing book.
Really? Jessica who?
Jessica Benjamin. Rooted in Winnicott also, about masochism, and female sexuality, and how sometimes in order to know what you're feeling, you have to be restricted. That's the lure of masochism. She wrote that 20, 30 years ago. But now she got into a Buddhist thing, actually.
Oh, she did?
And
Okay.
she's in a relationship with a Zen guy named Barry Magid, who has a little Zen temple on the Upper West Side. And her thing about the third, which is in that title, is like the transitional object that I was talking about of Winnicott, that you don't have to be just subject or object, that there's a place in between with the Bardo. There's a place between that we can cultivate through self-reflection.
And we can mutually identify, right? In a
She's
relationship.
she's very heady.
Yeah.
And Bonds of Love is very readable. All her stuff is not necessarily so readable. So you have to have the appetite for the language. She used to be with like a Marxist scholar of German Marxism. So she's coming from that place, but then she got into Buddhism, and she's super smart. Anyway, some people like her work.
So this one is Beyond Doer and Done To?
Yes. Yeah.
You have a question on this side of the room?
Dr. Thurman, you mentioned yesterday that, over here.
Yes.
You had mentioned the Dalai Lama sort of lamenting his lack of psychic abilities, and
Yes.
it brought up this old story that I wanted to ask you about because I've always been curious about his response to this. In the early 60s, there's a story of Allen Ginsberg and Gary Snyder going to visit the Dalai Lama, and at that time, Ginsberg was trying to get him to take LSD. And he must have had some sort of suitcase with him. And apparently the Dalai Lama's response was, if I take it, will I be able to know what's in that case without opening it? And I just never knew what that response
Really,
meant.
I never heard that story. And I never heard, actually, there was a Lama. I never heard about that. And I wonder if it really happened because, or if it was clear about that, because I was actually there in '64 when a Lama came with acid, who had some and wanted the Dalai Lama to take it. And the Dalai Lama was intrigued to take it. But then his court, his attendants, they didn't think it was necessarily a good idea. So his translator, who was a Sikkimese guy, he volunteered to try it out to see if it was safe for the Dalai Lama to try it, because the Dalai Lama was interested in it, and that was later than Ginsburg and Allen's trip. And then the secretary did have a trip, and son Tokyo was his name, Tokyo, and he had an awesome trip actually, and good trip, not a bad trip, and then he reported after a day or two that it was really interesting, and he felt it very worthwhile, but he wouldn't dare recommend Dalai Lama take it, because he didn't want the responsibility in case maybe it would go awry or something like that. And the Dalai Lama was, that year, he was only 29 years old. And they didn't ask my opinion. And I was a monk at the time, so I didn't volunteer that I had had a little experience at that time. And so then about 2 weeks later, 2 to 3 weeks later, that secretary quit his job as the translator, and he went to Delhi and he sort of set up as a guru. And he was a guru here in America and there for the next 40 years. Actually. So he actually did have a rather good trip. He somehow came to a deeper feeling about some of the things he had already learned, whatever. But because it was only he wasn't really a Lama before that. So, but he just didn't dare. So the Dalai Lama supposedly never took it. And if he did subsequently to that ever try that, he never mentioned it. And but actually there was a session the Mind and Life group had with him on addiction about 4 or 5 years ago, where I was in attendance, and they were talking about alcoholism, and they had someone from NIH and NIMH or something there, and people were talking about different things, and then there was one woman from Scandinavia who was saying that they had a good statistical record of helping people, who are horrible drunks, in Scandinavia, by not insisting like an AA thing that they could never touch a drop ever, like a sort of almost religious thing, but saying that yes, once they control the over drinking, and in their 30s or so, they get tired of the 20s, they drank their way through their 20s. And then they could have a glass of wine now and then or something, or a little bit of aquavit or whatever, but a little bit, And that worked well as an incentive. That they didn't make it be a kind of a religious thing for those particular people. And then the Americans were all freaked out about that. No, they can't do anything. No, they can't do anything. So then at some point, Dalai Lama innocently says, well, what about LSD? Which actually is correct. It's Stan Groff at Spring Grove in Maryland for years. He did. Now there's this new book by Pollan about how valuable it is in the case of alcoholism. It can be properly administered, and psilocybin better than acid, but anyway, it can be used. And then they all shouted him down. Oh no, you're holding this. Oh no, they all had spats about all these neuroscientists and NIH person, and they were like, 5, 6 years ago, they were just going nuts. And I remain silent.
Yes, it's good.
I didn't mention Stan Groff or whatever, because I didn't want them, like the debate. So Thomas was like, okay. And he wasn't speaking from experience, he claimed, So I don't know about that. But it's coming. Did you read Pollan's book? Have you seen that?
I haven't yet, no.
It's a really interesting history. Michael Pollan, called How to Change Your Mind, and how it's coming back as a therapeutic thing, as it always should have been, and as it was just wrongly put by Nixon into this Schedule 1, like with heroin and things like that, which is ridiculous. Nobody can become addicted to something that reveals you're unconscious to you, and therefore can be damaging if you're not handled right, and should be used by curandero. It's a kind of therapist in those Latin American and native indigenous South American societies, what they call curandero, means like a healer, and you need someone to help you in that sort of circumstance where you're suddenly your samskaras are stripped away temporarily. And you can go a little bit wacky too, if you don't have it handled right? Like being hurled into some sort of something.
We have a question on this side.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. So my question is around happiness. So we've been talking a lot about the Buddhist approach for death and cycle and infinite energy, and it's definitely more palatable than some other religions or theories, right? The question is, how do you advise people? Because in this age, we live longer. In the past century or so, less children die. We live way more than what our grandfathers used to. So we have more time to basically dwell with our own minds, right? So death is not very immediate risk for us. So we spend a lot of the questions around here is around how am I going to become happier or less, minimize my anxiety and so on. How do you advise people to manage their happiness levels?
Around death, do you particularly think?
And not about that. And so we spend a lot of time around
Well,
death.
have you ever read anything in what is known as the NDE literature, the near-death experience literature? Have you ever read any accounts like that of people who clinically died and then are revived in some way or come back around, and then they have an experience? Not everyone seems to relate to an experience, but many do. And there's a whole literature of that. Have you ever bumped into any of that?
I'm familiar with the idea. The question is, let's assume that you're not afraid about death right now. It's always there, but let's assume that you believe in the infinite energy field and that you're going to become a better person or a crocodile or whatever. But you're not consumed by that fear right now.
Let's assume that. I'm sorry, I don't. Yeah.
I can give you my.
What?
The battery died on it.
I was saying that you're not consumed by that fear.
Well, the reason I brought it up is that one phenomenon that is commonly seen in these different experiences related by such people is that once they get past struggling to hang on to the body, when they let go, they tend to not want to come back to the body. In other words, they go into a fairly released type of blissful state. And then someday they say, oh, they met Jesus or some Sufi or some guide or a shaman or whatever, they have different words for it, and in different cultures, and they come back and they're back in the body which has just been traumatized by whatever caused them to die temporarily. And they don't want to do so. So I'm just saying there's evidence that when you confront death, and of course they didn't completely die, materialists would argue, and therefore they're dealing with some states of the brain, the rabid materialist doesn't want there to be experience outside the brain. So they say, well, they got into some deeper experience in the brain. But whatever you say, the point is that when you get to confronting the impermanence and the unholdability of your embodiment, when you learn to let go of whatever you're holding on to as your sort of neural pattern that I'm me, the more you can let go of it, the more you find that some kind of positive energy emerges from within. And those who fight that energy tend to get all tightened up and uptight and freaked out. So the letting go experience, part of the meditative mother field that Mark talks about, is the field of you sort of let go your habitual sort of presence in the world when you meditate, and you kind of you don't necessarily have your boundaries slip right away, but you can a little bit let go of them. So if that's the case, in general, you could make a general rule that the ability to let go and release the boundaries and not rigidly hold on to some sort of self-image, and even there's a neural level of that. The phantom limb phenomenon. You know what I'm talking about? The phantom limb. If somebody is amputated, but they still feel sensations in the amputated arm that's no longer there. That means that there's a neural pattern of the way you're holding your own body, actually, in your brain. And so, which, the person hasn't let go of having an arm, even though they don't have one anymore, feeling they have an arm, because they're channeling those sensations through a pattern they have of themselves in the brain. So I'm just saying a general rule, how to be happier, which is sort of, I think you ended up as the question.
Yeah.
Generally learning to let go. And for example, in an argument with another person, one gets into a thing of I'm right, and then arguments deteriorate often to the two siblings, like yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, the two siblings kind of pattern. Well, then the one who's within about your own thing, well, maybe I'm not right. Maybe there's another way to see it. And then I think the person who gets in a confrontation with another and having a debate, and so maybe lets go of their view to be open to maybe they're considering another one, not necessarily gives it up or believes some other thing, just is open about what they are holding on to. Whatever degree that can happen, then to that degree there will be a better sense of well-being within the person. Is generally the thing, generally the attitude. And the the confrontation of death and the consideration of death is a surefire way to be happy. Hiding death and acting like I'm going to do something next year and after I retire and some other time is like a sure way to remain a little bit paranoid about what's lurking around the corner. But if one is aware that even this here, which I am or have or whatever, however one relates to being in a body or as a body, then the more lightly one is there, the more well-being is in the body. So death makes you more vividly alive. They say there are 3 roots in the Tibetan psychology. You meditate on, I surely am going to die personally. You meditate on that. And when you first start meditating on it, your mind will tell you, your distracting thought, oh, come on, of course you know that. Why meditate on it? It's gloomy and morbid. You'll hear thoughts like that in your mind. So you ignore those, and then you begin to critically realize that you're not really facing it, and you're acting like you're going to be here like this until you can collect on your Social Security. Never mind Paul Ryan lurking in the fringes of it. You're pretending to yourself you're immortal the way you are, and you're going to stay that way. And then eventually you'll get to, oh, gee, I could die, and that I can be certain of. So this, I won't be here like this forever. And then second, you think, well, I don't know when it will be. You say we live longer, but we zoom down highways and we pass within 2 or 3 feet of instant death. Some big truck going by at 60 miles, we're going 70 miles. And wham, that would be instant death, and we're within that inch of it. So yes, in some statistics, there's a higher, lifespan, life expectancy statistically, but individually, we're on the edge of it all the time, And you said that nice guy got murdered, that psychiatrist.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
And in the city, just going out, he was probably going to get lox and bagels at the
in his
local deli.
house, Ditmas Park, in his house in Ditmas Park.
That's really terrible.
Yeah.
So anyway, then the third one is, when I do die, what is it that is going to be the core thing? And then you look more into your own deeper mind. So how to be happier? Count the blessing you're alive. Start with. Are we really appreciating that we're alive? Well, okay, you follow.
The story that
ask Mark.
The story that I always tell that I think helps to answer that question about, how to manage the happiness when you're not thinking about death. When I was traveling with Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein to meet their teachers and their teachers' teachers and whatnot, we went to this forest monastery in Thailand, and Jack Kornfield's teacher, Ajahn Chah, was there. And we asked him a question, sort of like your question, happiness, suffering, death, like what are we supposed to do with all this? And he gave this beautiful answer that was like, he held up his drinking glass and he said, do you see this glass? I love this glass. It holds the water admirably. When I drink out of it, it's like perfect. When I put it on the shelf and the sun shines on it, it reflects the light beautifully. He said, but for me, this glass is already broken. So when the wind blows and it falls, or when my elbow knocks it off the shelf and it falls to the ground and breaks, I say, of course. He said, but because for me the glass is already broken, every minute with it is precious. And so it's like the last part. When I first heard it, it's like, oh yeah, it's already broken, and death, and what, suffering, and what, and impermanence, and everything. But in telling the story, at every opportunity over the years, that every minute with it is precious is really the heart of it. So that when you keep death, I think as Bob was saying, when you keep death too far away, like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, it's only other people, like, I know death happens to everyone, but for me, they would make an exception, sort of thing. Then every minute with it is precious isn't so alive. But when you keep it closer, like, oh, this is already broken, like impermanent death is happening all the time, everywhere, each moment, then the relational knowledge of the preciousness of, counting our blessings and being able to be here at this weekend and all together and having these kinds of conversations, and I get to be with Bob, like all that, the preciousness of it is something that makes you happier. I think to be able to really be in touch with it instead of taking it for granted and therefore not being in touch with it, it would be my answer to your question.
So a different angle to the
different
same
angle,
question.
yeah.
Basically, there's research and and belief and so on that people get used to everything.
Yeah.
So if something really bad or really good happens to you, at first you're happy or miserable, but then you get back to your old self. And happiness is basically a compass that evolution kind of put there to drive us forward, right? So basically, we get back to our old miserable self or whatever, right? The question is whether the answer is really remind yourself you're going to die soon, so you know what's really important and focus on this. This is how you manage the levels, or So you're probably going to be you're going to have your own compass, but somehow you'll be able to lift it a little bit, after.
Well, that's the thing about the traumatic residue, which is like the anxiety, depression, the poor me kind of thing that's inside of a lot of us. That if you shift your perspective on it, but instead of trying to make it go away, if you shift your perspective so that, oh, those are just like my old thoughts, but it doesn't have to define me anymore, then there's that's the way of, I think, optimizing the happiness that is already in you. A lot of people think about happiness as a thermostat, like you can't really, it's like it got a set point and you can't really change it that much. But the Buddhist thing is like, oh, there's a much more alive happiness that's possible even within that thermostat.
It's like super normal psychology. Yeah. But one thing I wanted to say that made me hollow was that there is this thing of cultivating patience when you're miserable and using adversity as a positive thing. And we do that normally, like you go to the gym and you lift weights and you strain your muscles and you even maybe undergo no pain, no gain, right? That's the famous slogan of Arnold and these kind of people, no pain, no gain. So there's a no pain, no gain way of dealing with adversity and deciding that I'm going to use this to develop the shield of patience, which is a very powerful and helpful way of living, and the antidote of anger and irritation and freaking out, And then there's the one of shifting perspective is called realistic patience. So there's the no pain, no gain. So the patience of voluntary suffering. Then there's the patience of being realistic about what has actually happened and seeing it from a different perspective. And then you can reach a point where you actually, which is kind of strange, where it's almost like masochism, where you like are ready to forgive anything that might happen to you, which is the patience of called non-retaliation, or that you will never want to angrily inflict harm back to anybody who injures you or anything. You have this kind of always serene no matter what, which is something to aspire to. I don't claim it, but I'm saying there are these three levels, and there's all these things about working with adversity and using it in a way. The four noble facts. The first one is that the unenlightened life will always be problematic. It will always be stressful. There will always be suffering in the unenlightened life, which is a spur to use that suffering to find the real freedom from suffering, of the bliss that resists all suffering. And that there is such a thing is Buddha's promise, from his own experience and the promise of the therapists of that tradition. And so that's kind of fun. So the suffering, the fact that he made that the first one, based on his discovery of the third one, is, he's like the doctor with the good bedside manner because he sees the health in the patient. But then he says, the way you are, though, you're going to inevitably suffer if you stay that way. So then there's a point of saying that. Otherwise, if the person was stuck that way forever, the way some people wrongly think Buddhism is only about suffering, then what's the point of rubbing it in? There's no way out of it, right? So that's good. So nirvana is like the traumatic residue, maybe, in some way. So everyday trauma is every unenlightened day trauma.
Right.
And then every enlightened day is traumatic residue, and it's relief.
Right.
It's a release.
Right.
It's kind of nice if you can put them together.
We have one
I
more
like
question before we end. One more question before we end.
Okay. Oh yeah. We are in it
Yeah.
now. More or less. So this is
Yeah.
This is a bonus question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to know if there is
Sarah,
a book.
Use the microphone.
Sharon.
If there is a book.
Oh yeah, please.
If there is a book that is a glossary of Buddhist or Tibetan terms like samsara, skamsara, Menla, Narandal.
He's got a book. He has a book. His book, Essential Tibetan Buddhism. It's called Essential Tibetan Buddhism. It has a really good glossary.
It's amazing.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty good one.
That's a good glossary.
Yeah, that is. That's not bad.
That's
I
the one
have
I always
a
look
more
at.
thorough one and some more big, heavy tone, but that's fine. Yeah, that's good.
What's the big?
Thank you, Mark.
What's the big heavy
Dr.
tome?
Mark, what?
What's the big heavy tome with the better one?
Oh, the brilliantly illuminating lamp.
The view. They might have
That
that.
has the tantric abdharmic psychology. The tantric abhidharma. John Zappa's take on the Excel Yoga Tantra.
Yeah.
Oh my. And different kinds of blisses. Bliss of what they call Xinjiang fluency, which I call other people have other terms for it. Actually, other people have crappy terms mostly.
Yeah.
Actually, and mine are better, but they won't ever agree until I
because
die.
they're yours.
No, when I die, they'll like it.
Right.
But not till then. I think they agree with me, and that's right. So that's terrible. But one of my great services, I want to end on this. My great services is the deeper insight. The one where you really realize nirvana, which they call the noble insight. That was translated, Arinyana it's called. It's not prajna, it's not wisdom. The word is translated, we translate it as wisdom, but it is a kind of wisdom. But it's called, it's the primal knowledge, meaning when you realize nirvana, or the ultimate nature of ultimate reality, non-dually as the stuff or the immediacy of relative reality. When you realize that, you realize it in a weird way of like that kind of thing that when you learn, you knew you always knew it, but you hadn't paid attention to it. So that's why they call it primal, And that primal knowledge or insight or wisdom, my colleagues for decades, for centuries, have called in English gnosis. Because they think it's a special knowledge, so they go back to the Greek, which is the cognate of our English know. I know it, We usually leave out the K, but we still write it, know. Because somehow knowing something is like something you can like control with your glottis, back of your nostril. So you have to know it. You can't just know it. And so anyway, they translate it as gnosis, and then everyone thinks, oh, the Gnostics, they better read Elaine Pagel, so go back to mysticism, ridiculous. So I translate it as intuition. And it's because when you get the primal intuition, you always had it. And actually that means that the knowledge of nirvana you already have, it's your Buddha nature. And you just have to get back, you're not going some exotic weird place far away, you're not going to Menla. You have it in your own mind, but you have to uncover it, all the stuff that's on top of it. Biological, physical, neural, cultural, delusion is a big deal, but it's a big work. It's a big analysis, but you can, and then when you get it, it's your intuition. So then if you have little spurts of it in between, it's really very cool. And then this is my last statement to you, which is what I console myself for my miserable, wretched state of unenlightenment that I persist in after 50 years of working on this in this life. And that is, dissatisfied and like trying to fix the world and fix myself and everything. And that is that at least I know that when I, by inference and by study, that when I do attain nirvana, as I call it, my consolation prize, which I like to share with you all, if you care to choose to use it to console yourself. I don't pretend I can console you, but I console myself by the fact that when I do have that primal intuition, when I reach it somewhere inside where it's no longer any location anyway, it's all everywhere. But when I reach it, I know I will always have reached it. And therefore, at the threshold, event horizon of it, and within it, I will revise my experience of an infinite past. And therefore, I will realize that right now, here in this moment, I'm already in nirvana. And I'll enjoy this moment that way with all of you, retroactively, even though now I'm just wretched and have to go off home and I have to go pee, actually. So therefore, we're going to take a break home.